Welcome. So we're going to be talking about WebR, the why, the what, and the how. Um, so I'm going to start by reloading these slides so you can see what's going on. So you can see that what's actually going on are some packages are being installed, and we get this little green light that says we're ready. So like I mentioned, this presentation will talk about what WebR is, why you might want to use WebR, and how you can use WebR. So what is WebR? I think a lot of you have seen this, but um, I think, just as a quick demo, so we've got a little code editor window here, and you can see we've got this run code button. So this all happened within your browser. So for example, I can change this to Geom Violin. Not everyone likes violin plots, but it's just for demo. So you can see there's basically R running in your web browser, which is a really mind-bending thing. So why WebR? So talk about a couple of applications. So especially for education, I've just started thinking about like the application to education, but other people have started doing that. So I'd love to hear if you have any kind of experience with that. So there's also the ability to kind of host internal websites. So you don't need a Shiny server to run Shiny, which is really kind of mind-blowing. And then I mentioned Shiny Live. So, they demonstrated this at PositConf the previous year, but it was for Shiny for Python. But now we've got Shiny Live for R as well. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of the mechanics of WebR. Not that like all of the technical details are that necessary to know, but I think this is just kind of such a fantastic effort. So I'd just like to highlight, some of what went into making WebR. So the story is that your web browser includes WebAssembly, the ability to run a language called WebAssembly and JavaScript, as you all know. So WebAssembly is basically machine code for the browser. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but it's a very low level language. And so what you can do is, there is Python for WebAssembly. There is R for WebAssembly, which we're talking about. So this is all what you need. You need to compile these languages into WebAssembly to actually use them in your browser. So the main idea, and if you look at the documentation, I spent a lot of time kind of muddling over the official documentation. The idea is that basically in the background, JavaScript has a connection to WebR. And basically there is what's called a canvas or an output area that basically so you send some R code into WebR and then it'll return some output. You don't need to know about this, but to do this, they created a special R canvas called HTML. So don't worry about the details of this diagram too much, but as this is from Bob Rudis's talk on WebR, and he was outlining, this is basically the tool chain for compiling everything into WebR. So this was not easy, especially the fact that if behind the scenes, a lot of R packages are running Fortran. So getting all of those libraries kind of up and working with WebAssembly, it was totally non-trivial. So again, there's not going to be a test on this. I just want you to appreciate how much work went into it. So how does WebR work? So it does, basically it spawns a WebR worker. So this worker is like a process in your browser. And so basically your web page is going to use JavaScript to communicate between it and the worker. So you can send code into the worker and again, get the results out. And what is really mind blowing is that everything is run in the browser. Okay, so like I mentioned, the WebR documentation, the official documentation, it's thorough, it's very technical. It really specifies a lot of the mechanics, like how you get JavaScript to interact with WebR within a web page. Talks about asynchronous evaluation. Just the thing that you should know about this documentation is it's really made for developers, especially JavaScript developers, so they can integrate it into their various frameworks like React. Bob Brutus kind of integrated it into a really small framework called Reef. I can kind of point you to that if you're interested in that. So what we're going to be talking today is the Quarto WebR um, documentation. So this is a Quarto extension that was written by James Balamuta and company. So it's become like a big effort by the Quarto community. Here's the link to the documentation. So like I said, what it is it's a Quarto extension that I'll show you how to install that in just a second. And it does all of this. It handles the communication. So you'll see that there are basically, there's an editor box that'll pop up. So yeah, so don't worry, you don't have to learn JavaScript. I think Cameron mentioned that he would rather become a farmer than than talk about JavaScript. Um, so let's talk about getting started. But before we do that, are there any questions before we move on? Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing you want to do, oh, there's a shark. Fantastic. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is create a project in RStudio. So it's under File, New Project, for a new folder, and then you want to select Quarto website. So this is what your file system, your RStudio project is going to look like when you first do that. So you can see there's that Quarto.yaml. So this is where you can configure a lot of things in Quarto. Main thing we're really interested in is this index.qmd. So this is the Quarto document, and we're going to make all of our edits in there. Okay, so the next thing you want to do, so in your RStudio terminal window, you're going to, not the console, the terminal window. So you're going to run this command, Quarto add, and then codeless/Quarto-WebR. And you'll know that works. Well, Quarto will give you a lot of output, but you'll notice that there's a folder called _extensions that was created in your project. And specifically, there's a codeless folder and then the WebR folder. So if you poke around in here, you'll see that there is a ton of JavaScript in there. So some of this James and company kind of wrote so to make it a lot easier for us mere mortals to actually work with WebR, and we are all extremely grateful. So okay, so we've installed the Quarto extension into our project. So now we're going to go into that index.qmd file and we're going to start editing the front matter. So this looks pretty much like usual, but we have to also specify an engine is knitter here. So this is necessary for the setup. And then you'll have this filters entry in the front matter, and you need to use this -WebR option. So this will activate the WebR extension. Additionally, there is this WebR specific entry. I don't have enough time to kind of talk about all of the different things in there, but you can specify packages that you want to install. So here, for example, we've got ggplot2, dplyr, and Palmer penguins. So let's just talk a little bit about packages. So the packages themselves, they need to be compiled for WebAssembly. So like we mentioned, a lot of packages have Fortran in the background. So you basically, someone needs to basically go through the efforts of figuring out what the dependencies are, and basically, kind of fuss around with the Fortran. So there's a specific package for this. It's called rwasm. This is a link to it. So, like I said, this is not yet for the faint of heart. It depends on whether your package has kind of external code dependencies, such as C code or Fortran code. So it's a little bit of a learning process. The good news is that if you go here, and this is where when you install WebR packages, this is kind of the main repository for WebAssembly compiled packages. So there's about 16,000 of them. So roughly about half of the R package universe, but not everything. So like I said, it is a bit of a process. The other good news is that you can install, like, R universe basically includes a way to compile WebR. So I think that makes it a lot less painful. So here in the Quarto WebR documentation, there is this thing called using packages in WebR. So this kind of talks about, all of the installation things. Okay, before we move on, any questions so far? And while we're here, I want to just show you what that repository looks like. Oh, okay. So that is actually, it takes a long time, but so there's a ton of packages that are already ready compiled. So most of the tidyverse is compiled. I believe tidy models is as well. Curtis, do you know?
I've heard 19,000 out of the 22,000 CRAN packages are compiled, but they did say that just because they compiled it doesn't mean it's going to work. So that there's like a testing phase too, and so like I don't want to get into the weeds or anything, but there's a place basically you do run into an error. They actually they want to hear about it because they could probably go fix it. So yeah,
Cool. Thanks, Curtis. So you can, so like I showed you one way to install things. You can actually just use install.packages to install stuff. It'll go to this WebR compiled package repository. You can switch this out, again, if you have kind of internal packages that you don't want to see up there. So there is the ability to kind of switch out the repository there. Okay, so we have set up our front matter. So we've done all of the hard parts. So this is what a WebR block looks like. So instead of just the R, you can see there's a WebR and then a hyphen here. So WebR-R. And then what does that look like? So when you compile, when you render your Quarto, it becomes this code block. So we can run this. So here, we loaded in the Palmer Penguins library, and then we just did a table of the different islands that the penguins are from. Any questions about this before we move on?
What about our own private packages that like might exist on GitHub? Do we have to compile them ourselves or yeah?
Yeah, yes. You do have to do that. And I think I didn't really look too much into what our universe does, but they basically is included, like if you host your package on our universe. I think that's kind of one of the bonuses is that they'll try to compile it to WebAssembly. Yeah. So a lot of this, and this really has to do with kind of the use case. So yeah. Good point. Thanks, Josiah. So he says if you have normal R code packages and then no compiled code, they should be able to install just fine. So if you just have if you just have R code in your package, then it should be able to install. Thanks. Okay, so this is basically our bread and butter. This is like, the code block. You can see this is to get to here is very easy. It's a lot like if you actually dive into the documentation, and Danielle Navarro has a whole um, basically blog article about how she used WebR in her web page. You do have to know a decent amount of JavaScript. So thankfully, James Balamuda and company have made it easier for all of us. So I want to talk a little bit about, there's a couple of contexts that are important. So you can add this context setup here. And this works analogous to the setup chunk in R Markdown. So you can basically, here we're just loading up our libraries, but you can also do things like preloading data into the WebR file system, which we will talk about in just a second. So there's also context output. And so this will show only the output, not that kind of execution cell with the editor. So this is what that looks like. Not too interesting, but say you want to kind of generate ggplots and you don't really necessarily want people to play with the code, you can do that. So I was down to the wire putting this presentation together. So I came up with a pretty elementary example of using this for education. So here we've got a ggplot, we've got a ggplot expression. So we want to add a new geom to this. So we're going to add geom point, and we want to map color to species. So you can see we layered everything onto the onto our regular hex visualization. And the cool thing is you can literally demo things like this. So here we've got just the geom hex visualization, and then we add our extra geom, and you can get it to work. So that's pretty neat. People have started thinking about all of the different. Oh, and thanks, Curtis, for mentioning about compiling your R packages. And so basically, you can see that there is like a lot of possibilities here. So I'd love to hear about how everyone else is using WebR. Like I said, I'm but a pup with WebR, but I'm learning quickly. Okay, so this is the one thing I've dug into this, and I think Gabby actually had a question about this, which was the file system for WebR. So there is a file system. It is this JavaScript file system called mscriptin. You don't need to know too much about that. The one thing you do need to know is it's not super easy to get stuff in. um, and one thing to note is that this file system is distinct from your project. It does not see anything in your project. There are ways to kind of have it see folders, but there's some configuration you need to do. So just from the start, it just can't see anything in your directory. So if you were trying to load stuff in, um, oh yeah, so there's a question for Brittany. So is it possible to change aesthetics of the code block, such as highlighting lines? So it is, so it's the actual code block is what's called a Monaco editor. So Monaco is the editor behind VS Code. So it's a JavaScript editor. So you can change these things, but I think in terms of doing code highlighting and everything, you're better off putting that in kind of a separate like R code block, unfortunately. But you could basically have like the code block on one side, and then you could have your code window on the other. Some approach like that. So let's talk about this. So you know, again, I'm drafting off of Bob Brutus and Danielle and the WebR documentation. So in terms of the documentation, they suggest that if you can put a data in a package, so basically it can be read from CRAN. Your other option is to serve data at a URL. So, and this URL needs to use HTTPS. So it needs to use a secure HTTP protocol. It does not work with HTTP if you have assets at HTTP. The majority of places that you can host data, like GitHub and stuff, that's going to be the secure version. So you don't really have to worry about that. Your main mechanism for getting it in the file system is this download.file function. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. And that's an empty bullet. Okay, so here's an example. And when you're teaching, if you don't want to show this, you could put this in a context setup chunk. So first we're going to show what's in the file system using list.files. And then we're going to, so this is basically, I'm just hosting a version of the Penguins data set here. And then we're going to download it using the URL. So, and then we'll list the files. So this was what was originally in the file system, just this file called rplots.pdf. I've actually never seen what this is, but you can see when we do that download command, it's going to try to download it. And now we have it in we have it in the WebR file system. So just to convince you, I'll do a list files again. So you can see penguins.csv is in there. There's some other things, like if you do a get working directory. So Gabby's question is, what happens to that file penguins.csv? So this is in the WebR file system now. So you can do anything like read to lim or read CSV with it. So if I just do a get working directory, you can see this is the default directory called /home/web_user. There's nothing in there except that rplots, .pdf file. Did that answer your question, Gabby? Yes, good point. So the file system will disappear once you close your session. Okay, so now that we've loaded stuff in, or we gotten things into the file system, we can just do a read.csv like usual. And here, just to show you, I loaded it in as penguins too, not penguins. So you can see it's a distinct object. And then we're just doing a count. And so this is basically the count. So, I can do a head penguins. So here are the first few lines. There is some styling you can do to the output chunks. This is mainly, I had to figure out how to kind of change this font size because it was huge, but there are ways to kind of tweak this. And there's basically, you can tweak it in, I think it's a JavaScript. No, it's a CSS property, I believe. Okay, so any questions about the file system? And if you don't have any questions, I don't believe you because this is the most confusing thing about it. Yeah, so Jim is saying, I know nothing about operating systems, but it's fair to say browsers are becoming one. Yep, yep. The dirty secret of RStudio I don't know if this is true anymore, but basically it is a browser app. That's simplifying things a lot, but it kind of blew my mind when I understood that. So a lot of things, there are JavaScript frameworks like Electron. There's probably better ones that I don't know of that basically let you wrap a website into an app, a downloadable app. How can we get data from the WebR file system to someplace else? So I believe um, my main suggestion would be curl, but curl is not compiled, and it's probably because there's a ton of files. So there are ways to basically take this output and save it. Um, I know that there's an issue request for Quarto WebR that would let you basically download, for example, a CSV file of something. But right now um, there are ways to do this, and I know you can do it in JavaScript. There's not currently a way to do it in Quarto WebR. Does that make sense? Okay. So I want to mention a little bit so there is a package called rwasm. There is a function here called file packager. So what you can do with file packager is it lets you take a whole folder and you can package it into a file system. So this is going to be an object, but you still need to have that file system object hosted somewhere. At least I haven't found anything else. Okay. So let's talk about deployment. So you will need a web server to deploy your WebR page. So it does not need to be a Shiny server. That's one thing to keep in mind. It just needs to be a server that can serve vanilla HTML. And I'm going to show you that in a second. This might seem obvious, but just know, your browser is going to need internet access to download the packages from the repository. So just keep that in mind. Again, all computations are done in the browser. So kind of the main ways we can do this, we can deploy the our WebR pages. So here we can do a Quarto publish. So for GitHub pages, gh-pages. We can do a Quarto publish.netlify. And what I'm going to show you right now is basically an example of using netlify drop to host a page. Okay,
Yeah.
can everyone see my GitHub? So
Mhm.
here, so like I mentioned, so in this quarto.yaml file, I've set my output directory to be called docs. So any Quarto HTML that's generated is going to go in this docs folder. So if you go into the docs folder, you can see this is what you need to kind of deploy it as a website. So I'm going to take this docs folder, and sorry I can't show it. I'm going to do this. What's called netlify drop. So what's amazing about netlify drop is that you can drag and drop like a folder of HTML files, and netlify will serve it almost immediately. So I'm going to do that by opening my. Oh wait, let me try sharing again. So you can see here's the WebR demo, and this is the docs folder. So I am going to switch windows, and I'm going to drop this docs folder into the netlify drop page. Okay, so going to do that. Come on. Okay. You can see it's uploading everything in that docs folder. So I'm going to send this link to everyone in chat. Um, but this is the whole WebR doc. So you can get to it here. Come on, chat. Okay, so this is the URL that this is at. This Netlify site is, and you can see it's the exact same. It's the exact same thing. So you can go there. So the the thing you need is something that serves HTML. I believe you can also serve up WebR via SharePoint, but I am not that capable in SharePoint. Any questions about the demo? Okay, so I hope this shows you it's a fairly painless process to get WebR documents onto the web. So I looked into Shiny Live, but I really didn't have that much time to kind of play with it. But Shiny Live is, like I mentioned before, is Shiny without a Shiny server. And you know, Winston Chang demonstrated this at one of the Posit Confs, at least for, well, both for Python and for WebR. So here, this is an example of Shiny Live. So we've got our Shiny code here, and you can see it compiles. So let's see if I can make a change. Oh, I'm not going to do it because I know it's not going to work. Oh, okay. So Gabby has a question. So I've never really used Netlify. So the ideal is if I have HTML files, you can put them there and host them in Netlify. Yes, you've got it exactly right, Gabby. So you'll need to have everything in that rendered folder. So it's not just the HTML file. And it's all of those other files too. So like I said, there's a lot more to Netlify, but I just wanted to show you like kind of an example of how fast you can get a WebR document up on Shiny or up on the web. So yeah, so here you can see there's our Shiny app, and then we can actually modify code in real time, which I am not. Let's change this to, I think this will be, I think that will be something close to black. Oh, so you can see I changed the color there. I don't really remember my hex codes for colors, but you can see I changed it from blue to that one. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, John. So Netlify, like I said, Netlify is deceptive. There's a lot of things to Netlify. So the main way you usually use Netlify is that you hook up your GitHub repo into Netlify. So like that repo can have that docs folder. So yeah, I think it's worth learning about. There are some other web hosting places. So if anyone else has a favorite, please mention it. Okay, so that's it. I just want to mention some resources that I used to kind of build these slides. So Bob, is brave and he started to dive into the WebR file system. So I drafted off of him. Um, Nicola Rennie has a lot of great examples here. Um, yeah, yeah, good point. John. So he said the GitHub repo can be private, but this the actual site is public. So there are ways to basically use private repos with Netlify. So a lot of this comes from Bob Rudis's WebR talk. So much more if you're interested in the technical details. Bob goes into a lot of it. So this is a link to the Quarto WebR extension, so what I've mostly been talking about. And there's WebR developer resources as well. So great questions, everyone. Anything else that this brings up? Are you all excited to use WebR in your work now? Or has anyone else played with WebR and has a cool application they want to say? Yeah, so Jeremy is asking, so does the WebR code work with outputs that have HTML widgets like Reactable? The short answer is yes, because it is I believe you can output HTML widgets from WebR, but I haven't actually played with that at all.